All right. So are we expecting everyone to be on time? So I guess we'll start going live at 1:30. So hi everybody. My name is Tom Abrams, and I will be kind of just facilitating this Zoom call. We're very privileged and excited to have a special guest today, Anthony Ray Hinton. He's bringing us his story from a couple thousand miles away, I guess, from Alabama. So Anthony Ray Hinton, he survived for 30 years on Alabama's death row. His story is a decades-long journey to exoneration and freedom. In 1985, Mr. Hinton was convicted of the unsolved murders of two fast food restaurant managers based on the testimony of ballistics experts for the state who claimed that the crime bullets came from a dusty revolver found in Mr. Hinton's mother's closet. An all-white jury convicted Mr. Hinton, and he was sentenced to death. After years of petitioning to have the revolver reanalyzed, 3 independent experts concluded that the bullets could not have been fired from his mother's revolver. With the assistance of the Equal Justice Initiative, EJI, led by attorney Brian Stevenson, Mr. Hinton was freed in 2015. Since his release, Mr. Hinton has traveled the world, sharing his story and discussing the changes that need to be made to prevent similar injustices from happening to other people. In 2018, Mr. Hinton published The Sun Does Shine, How I Found Life in Freedom on Death Row, which was selected for Oprah's book club and is a New York Times bestseller. In 2019, he was awarded an honorary doctorate from St. Bonaventure University. I have only known Mr. Hinton now for about 25 minutes. It is a pleasure to have him here. He seems like a just down to earth, great guy, and it's my pleasure to introduce you, Mr. Hinton. So I will shut my mouth. The kids will probably tell you it's probably hard, but I will shut my mouth. I will go on mute, and I will allow you the time to tell us your story.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a story that I hate I have to tell, but I often say that is something that I think those of us who live in America need to know, that the system is not what they would have you to believe it is. I never will forget, on one of the hottest days in July, I woke up that morning like any other morning, thinking about what I was going to do for the rest of the day. Going to prison, going to jail was the farthest thing from my mind. As I was sitting outside, my mother had made some lemonade, and I went inside to get a glass. And as I was pouring a glass of lemonade, my mother asked me, was I going to revival that night? And I said, yes, ma'am. For in the South, we say yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am, and yes, sir, and no, sir, out of respect for our elders. And so as I poured that glass of lemonade, I went on back outside and sit up under this tree for about 15 or 20 minutes. I got up, carried the glass back into the kitchen. My mother was still in the kitchen, and she asked me, what time does revival start? And I said, 7 o'clock, Mama. And she said, well, you got time to go out there and cut that grass. I looked at my mother. I was so didn't want to cut grass. It was too hot to cut grass, for one thing, and I really didn't feel like cutting the grass. And I looked up at my mother, and I gave her that baby look, being the baby of the family. And I said, Mama, I promise you I will cut that grass tomorrow. And my mother looked at me and she said, I'm trying my best to see how did you get. You will cut the grass tomorrow out of me telling you to go cut the grass. I finally looked up at her, and she looked back at me and she said, boy, get out there and cut that grass. I goes outside and I fire up the old lawnmower and begin to cut the grass. About 25 minutes into cutting the grass, I just happened to look up, and there stood 2 white gentlemen that I'd never seen before. I cut the lawnmower off and I said, can I help you? One of them replied, we're looking for Anthony Ray Hinton. I said, that would be me. Again, how can I help you? They identified themselves as 2 detectives from the Birmingham Police Department. They said, we have a warrant for your arrest. And I said, on what charges? One of the detectives said, we will explain that to you later, but right now, we want you to put your hands behind your back. I complied. I put my hands behind my back and they put the handcuff on me, proceeded to put me in the police car. And I said, hold up, at least allow me the opportunity to go inside and tell my mother I'm being arrested for something. One of the detectives said, we can't let you go back inside. And we argued for about 2 minutes. And finally, the other detective said, let him go in and tell his mother he's being arrested. I goes in and I show my mother the handcuff, and like any good mother, she begins to scream and holler, what are those handcuffs doing on my baby? One of the detectives said, take him out while I stay in here and talk to his mother. A few minutes later, he comes back out and we proceeded to go to the Birmingham County Jail. And on our way there, one of the detectives asked me, Anthony, do you own a firearm? And I said, no. I said, but my mother has an old Smith & Wesson that she keeps around the house for snakes. Once I told them that my mother had an old gun, they dropped me off at a substation, turned around and went back and told my mother that I had told them about a gun. My mother gave them the gun. Once they got the gun, they came back and picked me back up at the substation, and we proceeded to go to the county jail once again. And on our way there, I must have asked these detectives at least 50 times, why am I being arrested? They never would tell me. And on the 51st time, this seemed to set the detective off that wasn't driving. He said, you want to know why you've been arrested? I said, yes. He said, we're going to charge you with first-degree robbery, first-degree kidnapping, first-degree attempted murder. I said, oh, you got the wrong person. I haven't done any of that. He looked at me and he said, let me tell you something right now. I don't care whether you did it or didn't do it, but make sure you remember, I am going to be the one to make sure you found guilty. I said, for a crime I didn't commit. He said, you must have a hearing problem. Didn't I just tell you I don't care whether you did it or didn't do it? He said, if you don't remember nothing else, remember, I am the one who's going to make sure that you found guilty. And as they drove a little farther, he turned back around. He said, by the way, there's 5 things that are going to convict you. Would you like to know what they are? And I said, yes. He said, number 1, you're black. Number 2, a white man is going to say you shot him. Whether you shot him or not, believe me, I do not care. He said, number 3, you're going to have a white prosecutor. Number 4, you're going to have a white judge. And number 5, you're going to have an all-white jury. He said, do you know what that spells? And he repeated the word conviction, 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 conviction. By that time, we have arrived at the county jail. They placed me in a holding cell. I had been in this holding cell for about 2 hours, and finally this detective opened the door and I said, detective, if you don't mind, can you tell me the date and the time this crime took place? He goes through his note, he tells me the date and the time, and when he told me the date and time, I said, thank you, Jesus. And then I said, thank you, God. I said, thank you, God, because I knew on that particular day and that particular time, I had an alibi. I was at work. And I said, thank you, Jesus, because my supervisor was white. And I figured once he go out there and talk to my white supervisor, he would come back and say, Mr. Hinton, we made a mistake. Well, I told him my supervisor's name. I told him his phone number. I gave him the address where I was working. He shut the cell door. He left. About 5 hours later, he came back. He opened his cell. He said, I have good news and bad news. He said, the good news is we no longer going to charge you with first-degree robbery, first-degree kidnap, first-degree attempted murder. Your alibi checks out. He said, in fact, I saw you on one of the forklifts at the exact time that we thought you had committed a crime. He said, but now we have decided that we're going to charge you with 2 counts of first-degree capital murder. I said, capital murder? I haven't killed anyone. He said, do you not recall on the way here, I told you I didn't care whether you did it or didn't do it? He said, the same thing is for these new charges. I don't care whether you did it or didn't do it. but I'm going to be the one to make sure you found guilty. And as I was standing there trying to convince this detective that I could never take another human being's life, he finally put his hands up and he stopped me and he said, "Let me be honest with you." He said, "I truly believe you didn't do it. But y'all," referring to all black, "y'all are always doing something. And the moment you get caught, you say you didn't do it." He said, "Take this rap from one of your homeboys who truly committed the crime." And I looked at that detective and I said, "Detective, there's not a homeboy in this world that I would take a rap for like this." He shut the door and I sit in jail for about a year and a half. And finally I went before a judge. The judge read off the charges, asked me, did I understand what I was being charged with? And I said, "Yes, Your Honor." He asked me, could I afford an attorney? I told him, no, I couldn't. He looked back in his courtroom and he called his attorney up front. He told this attorney he wanted him to represent me on 2 counts of first-degree capital murder. The first thing that lawyer said out of his mouth was, "I did not go to law school to do pro bono work." I looked at the lawyer and I said, "Sir, would it make a difference to you if I told you that I was innocent?" That lawyer looked at me and he said, "The problem with that statement is all of y'all is always doing something. And the moment you get caught, you say you didn't do it." I looked at that lawyer and I said, "Sir, I could never take another human being's life." And that lawyer said, "That's what all y'all say." Well, I sit in jail and finally I go to trial. They find me guilty on 2 counts of first-degree capital murder. The judge proudly stand up and say, "Anthony Ray Hinton, you have been found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree capital murder. It is the order of this court that I sentence you to death." And that judge had the audacity to say, "May God have mercy on your soul." The prosecution that day said perhaps a little louder than he intended to say, but the prosecution could be heard saying, "Today we didn't get the right nigger today, but at least we got a nigger off the street." On December the 17th, 1986, I finally went before the judge and he sentenced me to death. I was transported to Holman Correction Facility where I would be placed in a 5x7 cell in solitary confinement. I had no idea at the time that I would be there for 30 long years. But I do know for the first 3 years, I did not say a word to another human being for 3 years. Not even my mother, not even my best friend. Whenever they would come to visit, I would just say, mm-hmm. And my mother always would ask me, "Are you feeling okay?" And I would just say, mm-hmm. I was angry. I was disappointed that I had been found guilty for a crime that I know and God knows that I hadn't committed. But I was angry more with God than I was anyone. You see, at the age of 4, my mother made all of her kids go to church. And my mother had a saying that as long as you live in my house, you have to go to church. My mother brought me up to believe in God. She told me that God can do everything but fail. She told me no matter what I do, God is always there. And I kept wondering, where was God when I was being lied on? Where was God when I was being prosecuted for a crime he knew that I didn't commit? And where was God when the judge sentenced me to death? I had decided that God didn't live inside of me anymore. And going into the 4th year, I woke up at 1 o'clock to the sound of a grown man crying. A man that I had lived by for 3 years and never asked him his name, where he was from. But my mother had taught me compassion. My mother told me no matter what one does in life, they still deserve compassion. They still deserve love, and they deserve understanding. So I got her out of this bed that was too small for me, and I walked up to the bars and I said, "Sir, do you need me to call and get the correction officer back here?" It took this man a minute to reply, but finally he said, "No, I just got worried my mother passed." I told him how sorry I was to hear that, and I told him if I can do anything for him, please feel free to just holler and let me know. I sit on this bunk bed that was too small for me, and at that moment, I realized that I had something to be thankful for. My mother was still alive. I was alive. And at that moment, I closed my eyes and I said, in order for me to survive this hell that I'm living, I have to somehow take my mind and leave this place. I closed my eyes as tight as I could and I began to imagine being at the palace. For I've always wanted to see Queen Elizabeth. And I decided at that moment I would go see the Queen. I arrived at the palace and told the guard that I was there to see the Queen. They goes in and they tell the Queen that I'm there. She invite me in. I tell the Queen who I am. We sit down, we talk about Prince Charles, Prince Harry, Prince William, and the tragedy of Prince Di. About 40 minutes into that conversation, the Queen realized that she hadn't offered me anything to drink. And she stands up and she looks at me, and in her British accent, she says, "Mr. Hinton, would you like some tea?" And I told the Queen I would love some tea. And she said, "What would you like in your tea?" And I told her a spot of lemon. She had the butler to go out and bring some lemon, and I squeezed it in my tea. We drank tea and we conversate some more. About 30 minutes later, I stand up and I tell the Queen I must be leaving. The Queen looks at me and she said, "Mr. Hinton, will you come back?" And I told the Queen I would love to come back. Now that I realize in my mind that I can leave death row anytime I want to, I did something next that I said I would never do. I decided that I would get married. But at the age of 12, I said I would never marry. But I decided that I would get married, and now I just didn't marry anybody. I married the beautiful and talented actress, Halle Berry. Halle Berry and I stayed married for 15 long, beautiful years up here. And Halle Berry was the perfect wife, for she said nothing but yes, dear, and okay, dear. Whatever you want to do is okay with me, dear. 15 long, beautiful years. And then going into the 16th year, the warden decided that he would show us a movie. And the movie was called Speed. And for the very first time, I laid eyes on the beautiful and talented actress Sandra Bullock. I watched this lady drive this bus around and around. And to be honest with you, I was building my nerves up to give Halle some sad news. And finally, when I built my nerves up, I looked at Halle Berry and I said, "I'm going to divorce you and marry Sandra Bullock." True to her word, she said, "Okay, dear." And by that time, the guard called me. He said, "Anthony, I've been trying to call you for 10 minutes. I said, "I'm sorry. I was gone. What is it?" He said, "You have a legal visit." I said, "But I don't have an attorney." He said, "Well, Anthony, somebody's out there pretending to be a lawyer. Get dressed and go see who it is." I get dressed and I go out there, and there's this lawyer from Boston. I asked the lawyer who in Boston know me that they would send him well to Alabama to represent me. And he tells me a man by the name of Brian Stevenson. I asked him, who is Brian Stevenson? He tells me about Brian Stevenson and the work that they do right here in Montgomery, Alabama. This lawyer for the next 3 years would work on my case. He would come back every year and tell me what he had done, what he had found out. And going into the 4th year, he came back and he said, "Anthony, I can get you a life without parole." And I said, "Life without parole is for guilty people, not innocent people. I said, you want me to stand up and plead guilty to a crime that I didn't commit? I said, I could never do that. I said, you want me to stand up and tell the victim family that I killed their loved one? I could never do that. I said, the state of Alabama know that I did not kill anyone. But if the state of Alabama is hell bent on executing me for a crime they know that I didn't commit, so be it. I said, we all have to die at some point in some time. I'm not ready to die, and I don't want to die for a crime that I didn't commit. I said, but I could never stand up and say I did something when I didn't. I said, I want to share something with you. I was 12 years old. I said, my mother told me that if I was man enough to bend down and pick up a rock, and if I was man enough to throw that rock, then I should be man enough to say I throw that rock. I said, this is one rock I didn't throw, and therefore I could never say I did when I didn't. I looked at the lawyer and I said, I need a lawyer that believes in me. I need a lawyer that is willing to go to jail for me if necessary. The fact that you trying to get me a life without parole tells me that you don't believe in me. And since you don't believe in me, I have no choice but to fire you. The lawyer said, are you serious? I said, yes. I said, but I want to thank you for what you tried to do and what you wanted to do, but I just could never do that. And as that lawyer was going at the front door, they was taking me back toward the cell. Something in my mind said, you got to be the dumbest person in the world because you just fired the only lawyer that you had. But just as that thought entered my mind, another thought came to me and said, you did the right thing. Always stand up for what you believe in. And as I got back toward the cell, a guard was watching TV and I stopped and I said, what you watching? He told me he was watching his lawyer out of Montgomery, a man by the name of Brian Stevenson. I asked him, can I stand there and listen for a moment? And he said, yes. Brian Stevenson was talking about the death penalty, why we don't need a death penalty in this country. And as I listened to Brian Stevenson, something came over me. I knew this is the man that I needed to try and get to represent me. As I went in that cell, I wrote Brian Stevenson a letter, and I remember saying, dear Mr. Stevenson, I want to thank you for the lawyer that you sent from Boston, but I am sad to say that it didn't work out. I said, Mr. Stevenson, I would like to ask you a question, and that question being, would you consider being my lawyer? But before you say yes or no, all I ask is that you read my transcript. And if you decide and find one thing that points to my guilt, do not worry about becoming my lawyer. Do not send me another lawyer. I am perfectly willing to die for a crime that I know I didn't commit. About 3 months later, Mr. Stevenson responded saying that he would read my transcript. 5 months later, I get a letter that he was coming to see me. The day that he said he was coming to see me, he came. The day that I shook that man's hand, I knew that God had sent me his number one lawyer. And as we sit down at the table, we talked about our childhood and our upbringing. And finally, we got to talking about the case. And I said, Mr. Stevenson, if no two guns is alike, I already know that the state of Alabama is telling a lie. I said, Mr. Stevenson, that gun that they got from my mother home have not been fired in over 25 years. And I looked at him and I said, Mr. Stevenson, I need you to do me a favor. And he asked me what was the favor. I said, I need you to hire a ballistic expert. Mr. Stevenson looked at me and he said, well, I was going to do that anyway. And I said, Mr. Stevenson, I'm not explaining myself right. I said, Mr. Stevenson, I need you to hire a white man. And I need this white man to be from the South. I said, Mr. Stevenson, I have lived in the South all of my life, and the South will only recognize one of their own. I said, Mr. Stevenson, it have to be a Southern white man. Mr. Stevenson asked me, why did it have to be a Southern white man? And I said, Mr. Stevenson, you can go out and get the best white female in the country, but her word is no good on the witness stand. Not in the state of Alabama. And I said, Mr. Stevenson, it cannot be a person of color. I said, Mr. Stevenson, they were definitely no good on the witness stand. Here I was on death row, and now I got to worry about what race, what gender a person have to be in order to help me prove my innocence. Well, Mr. Stevenson left that day, and he said that he would try and find that particular white man. About 3 months later, I got word to call him, and I called him, and he had found 3 of the world-renowned experts. He told me that these 3 experts was the best of the best. He told me that these 3 experts, 2 of them live in Texas and 1 of them live in Virginia. And he said, Ray, I need to explain something to you. These 3 experts have never testified for the defense. They only testified for the prosecution. I said, Mr. Stevenson, did you remember to ask them, would they just tell the truth? He said they had assured him they would tell exactly what the evidence say. If the evidence was against me, they would say it's against me. If it was for me, they would say it was for me. And I said, Mr. Stevenson, if you can afford it, hire those 3 experts. They came to Alabama on separate occasions. They all did their testing. They did something that I didn't learn until after I was released. Those 3 experts tried to manipulate the gun to make it match, and it still would not match. And when they finally did their testing, they all 3 got together and told Mr. Stevenson that the state of Alabama had made a mistake. I was willing to let him use the word mistake, but I knew that the state of Alabama had not made a mistake. We take this new evidence to the Attorney General, a man by the name of Bill Pryor. Bill Pryor was quoted as saying, although it would only take 1 hour to re-examine the bullets, but it would be a waste of his time and a waste of the taxpayer money. As far as he was concerned, the right man was on death row. And for not doing his job, George W. Bush appointed him to a federal lifetime appointment. We goes before 2 more attorney general. All 2 new attorney general refused to take 1 hour. And while these 3 men would not test the gun again, I sit on death row an extra 16 years. And while I sit there an extra 16 years, I got word that my mother had passed. But my mother was all I ever had. All of my life, my mother had always been my biggest cheerleader. And without my mother here, I told Mr. Stevenson that I didn't care about that case. I said, if the state of Alabama wants to execute me right now, they can. I don't care. And I could somehow hear my mother telling me that she didn't bring me up to be a quitter. She brought me up to fight when there was a fight. She brought me up to stand up for what I believe in. The next day, I called Mr. Stevenson and told him that I wanted him to give the state of Alabama all the hell that he could give them. We filed our case. We went before 14 judges in Alabama. They all refused to do the right thing. And finally, Mr. Stevenson said he was going to file my case to the United States Supreme Court. 2 years after filing to the United States Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court did something that it have never done in the history of the courts. All 9 justices ruled in my favor that I was entitled to a new trial. They sent the case back to Alabama. We goes before a judge. The prosecution stand up and say, Your Honor, it is with great sadness that I inform this court that we have lost a gun to this case. The judge said, what do you mean you lost the gun? They said, Your Honor, we cannot find it. She gave them some more time to find the gun. She set a court date for us to be back in her courtroom. That day come, we go back. The prosecution stand up and say, Your Honor, it is with great pleasure that I inform this court that we found the gun to the case. But once again, it was great sadness that I inform you today that we cannot find the bullets to the case. She gave them more time to look for the bullets, and while we thought they was looking for the bullets, we found out that the prosecution had called one of his experts and asked him to come and test the bullets one more time. He came and he tested the bullets. He quoted in the Birmingham newspaper as saying that the bullets do not match the way they did 30 years ago. The bullets, they didn't match 30 years ago. It wasn't going to match 30 years later. I spent 30 years in solitary confinement. For 30 years, the state of Alabama knew that the bullets never did match. But we have a system that if you don't have the money to hire a decent defense, more than likely, if you found in charge with a crime, more than likely you will be sent to prison. How is it that we have a system that treats you better if you're rich and guilty, opposed to if you're poor and innocent? How is it that the state of Alabama had every intention of executing me in the name of justice in each and every one of your names? The state of Alabama was going to execute me in your name, in the name of justice. And today, I would like to ask you, where's my justice? Where do I get justice from? What would be justice? Here I am. This coming Friday will be 6 years of being free. No one have had the decency to say, Mr. Hinton, we're sorry. But I want you to know that I forgave the men that got together, lied and tried and got a conviction. I forgave them. They haven't asked me for forgiveness. But I am a believer that if you don't forgive, you will never be free. I want to be free. Every day, I have to live with the fact that they took 30 years of my life. 30 years that they could never give back. I didn't get the opportunity to say goodbye to my mother. They took everything that they could take from me, but I refused to let the state of Alabama have my joy. You see, the world didn't give it to me, and the world can't take it away. I would like to ask you, what would you do if they came for you? What would you do if you were charged with a crime that you didn't commit? What would you do if you didn't have the money to hire decent defense? What would you do if you passed a polygraph test, but they cared more about the color of your skin than the results of that test? What would you do if you was found guilty and sentenced to death? What would you do if you had to spend the rest of your life in a cell smaller than your bathroom? What would you do if you've been waiting all your life to die? And finally, one day, you were set free. Who would you be? Because I have to ask myself that every day. Every day, I try my best to be a voice for those that don't have a voice. Every day, I try to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. Every day in this country, men and women goes to death row that are innocent. Today, I ask you to join me and let's put an end to the death penalty in this country. Thank you for listening to my story.
Mr. Hinton, I would like to say thank you for sharing your story. I'd also like to say that, I know I'm sorry. And though I might not be a proxy, I think that we're all kind of seeking your forgiveness, for the time that you spent, on death row. It's just, it's a tragedy. And thank you again for sharing with us. So, I mean, I'm just completely blown away and flabbergasted and all kinds of thoughts running through my head. As an English teacher, I value stories, and the real stories like that are just so impactful. We heard about your perseverance, setback after setback, the love for your mother, and how she stood by you. Those are the stories that are just so meaningful to us. And then obviously our struggle with race in America and justice. And that's why we, again, we thank you for being here. The kids will tell you that I'm long-winded. I like to talk, but I'd like to give them an opportunity to ask you some questions, because this is the generation that's going to kind of work and hopefully help solve these problems and grapple with them. So Mr. Hinton, I just have a kind of a strategy. So I just have people in my window, and I'm just going to kind of go around and just ask them as I see them in my window. And so I'll say, first up, I have Kate, and then I would have Mia Yim on deck, and then Riley on double deck. All right. So I'm going to shut my mic off, and I'm going to pass it off to Kate and give you the floor, Kate.
Thank you, Dr. Abrams, and thank you for sharing your story. It really.
I can't hear.
Yeah, Kate, I can't hear you. I could sort of hear a little bit. Nope. So what we're going to do is, Kate, why don't you bounce off and then bounce back on, and we're going to go to our person on deck, Mia.
Yeah, I'll just start by saying, thank you so much for taking the time, and echo the gratitude that
Yes.
Dr. Abrams gave. Like, I feel so privileged to be here and to have heard your story and see your strength and bravery. So thank you.
Thank you.
My question for you is, if you could go back to the day that you were convicted, what would you tell your past self? Like, what kind of advice would you give to yourself?
Oh, I would give myself the advice to try and find an attorney that believes in his calling. If you make a choice to go to college to be a lawyer, I think you should make up your mind before you decide that are you going to be a lawyer that's about trying to make money, or you're a lawyer that want to bring justice and true justice to people. I think the best lawyer in the world is a lawyer that do not look at his client if they're not able to pay him, but still give him or her their best. And I often would say that had I known what I known, I would have preferred to just tell that lawyer that represented me, thanks, but no thanks. Because we have a saying in America, you get what you pay for. And I didn't have the money to pay for an attorney, and I really didn't get an attorney. I got an attorney to make it legal and binding, where I couldn't use that on an appeal. And I also would have people to believe, would tell myself to be very careful what you tell the authority. I was brought up that in a way that if you haven't done anything, my mother would always tell me, why would you tell a lie if you haven't done anything? Why would you run if you haven't done anything? If you haven't done anything, stand there like a man, tell the truth. I goes back and I would not tell those detectives that my mom had a gun, because it was that gun that they lied and said that it was the murder weapon when it wasn't. Do you go against what you've been taught to be truthful, or do you go against knowing that they can take this gun and say that it matched when it didn't match? And so I probably would have to go against my mother telling me to be truthful. I would have never said anything to the detective that my mom has a gun. But when you believed, as I once believed, in justice, thought that the police was out only to get those who had committed a crime, I had no reason to lie, and therefore I was truthful. Being truthful cost me 30 years of my life, and to somewhat it still costs me every day. And so those are the things that I would do. I wouldn't tell the police about the gun, and I would tell the judge that if this is the best lawyer that he can appoint to me, I pretty much would have preferred to represent myself. I didn't know anything about defending myself as far as a lawyer, but I've learned over the years. And I would have preferred to just have a lawyer that would allow me and showed me what to do and how to say it and whatever, opposed to just having a lawyer that did just enough to get me convicted. That's what I'll do.
Thank you, Mia. So we'll try Kate again. Hopefully the mic works, and then Riley's on deck.
Is this okay?
No, I still can't hear you, Kate. Oh, all right. We'll try Riley. Then Riley, you have to get up there in the batter's block. Riley's up, and then Maddie Marshall on deck.
First, I also want to say thank you so much for coming to speak with us. It's
Thank you,
really
Ralph.
amazing. And my question was, if you could change one thing about the criminal justice system in the United States, what would you change and why?
I would change the saying that you have a right to an attorney. I mean, that is true, but we need a system that is fair to everyone. We need a system that we all can believe in. And if I could change anything, I would not allow any detective to fabricate evidence if it don't match. All of us should be screaming, we don't want the wrong person to go to jail. And so the system is complex in a way that there's not one thing that you could actually change, but if I could change the people that have the authority over the system, for them to be honest, for them to only want to put the people in jail that who have committed the crime. You know, I call myself old school, but I was brought up. I once heard tell of a judge who once said he would prefer 12 guilty men to go free than one innocent person to go to jail. That is the type of judge we need. Those are the type of prosecutors we need. If you cannot find the right person who committed the crime, just don't pick someone out and prosecute them and send that person to prison, because you're giving that person who actually committed the crime the opportunity to continue to do the crime. And so it would be so many things, Kate, that I would have to try. But I think it all started with getting the right people that care about the justice system and making sure that it is carried out equal and fairly for every human being that have to come in contact with the system. So I would just say the one thing I would do is try to make sure that everybody that has a part in it or has the right part and has a meaningful, that to make sure that it is carried out fair.
Great. Thank you so much, Riley. So we have Maddie, and then on deck would be Charlie. And then maybe we might have one more question. Hopefully, we'll see how it goes. Go ahead, Maddie, you're up.
You can hear me, right? Okay. First off, I wanted to reiterate the point of thank you so much for being here. I don't know if I can properly articulate my gratitude, but it's immense, and I'm really grateful that we've had this opportunity to be able to ask you questions and hear your story. My question is, in your opinion, what would the perfect justice system be?
So Mr. Hinton, it was a little bit laggy, but her question was, in your opinion, what would the perfect justice system be?
Oh, the perfect justice system would be that no innocent person would ever go to prison. I just believe we can accomplish that. I believe we should accomplish that. Again, it goes back to what I was saying to Riley. We got to have people that care about the system in order to make sure that the system is perfect. And we often been told nothing is perfect in this world, but I truly believe we can get as close to perfect as we possibly can. If a person cannot afford an attorney, or I think the attorney that decide to represent that person should be an attorney that is willing to give him or her his best or her best. We don't want an attorney that would just say, okay, the judge told me I had to represent you. I'm gonna do just enough to make it legal. So the perfect system to me would be having the right people and people that care about the system to make it fair, to make it right. I just believe it all start with judges, just start with police officers, start with prosecutors. These are the people, those three people are the one that know from the very get-go whether they have the right person, whether there's enough evidence to the person who they saying is committed the crime. And my case, for example, I wish I could tell you that the state of Alabama made an honest mistake. You don't know how bad I want to believe and want you to believe that they made an honest mistake, but they didn't. They knew that those bullets never did match. And the prosecutor, if you was to read up on him, you'll see why. That I think that he should never been a prosecutor. And that's why we will never have a fair system as long as we allow certain people to be prosecutor. And he should never have been one because his thinking, he was racist. And he wrote a book. His name was Bob McGregor, if you ever want to look it up. He wrote a book and he said he believed in the theory of Hitler, that the world should be predominantly white. He had that type of mentality, and I could never understand how is it that with that type of mentality, with that type of racism, how did he get to be a prosecutor? And how did he go to school just for that? And perhaps that was his motive to go to college, to be so he can send people innocent to prison. He didn't care. But I wish I could explain it better, but there's nothing I can tell you other than we got to have people that care about the system and care about not sending innocent people to prison in order to try and have a perfect system.
Thank you so much, Maddie. And Mr. Hinton, Kate just wants to thank you for coming here. Her mic's been a little funky, so she just wants to show her her gratitude for your appearance. So next up, Charlie. So Charlie Grossman, you're up.
Am I coming through good? Sweet. So like everyone's saying, I just want to thank you so much, Mr. Hinton. It's a real honor to be in your presence, sir. It's a hard story, and I'm very sorry. I did a little bit of research after I heard that you were coming to the school, and in another one of your talks, so that you mentioned that you befriended a KKK member while in prison. Could you talk about how you were able to make friends with someone who was like so racist?
Thanks for the question. His name was Henry Francis Hayes. And from the moment he was conceived, his father was the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan here in Alabama. And his father taught him nothing but hate. And his mother taught him nothing but hate. His community taught him nothing but hate. And Henry was given an order by his father. And his father told him and two other Klansmen to go out and kill the first African-American male they came across. And they came across a 16-year-old, 19-year-old mentally retarded black male. And they befriended him and got him in the car and they stabbed him 65 times. And that didn't satisfy Henry. Henry got out and threw the rope over the power line and hung this male. That didn't satisfy Henry. Henry took his knife out of his pocket and cut off the black male's genitals. That seemed to satisfy Henry. But you know, we live in a country where they say that it takes a village to raise a child. And I often wonder, where was that village when this young boy was being taught to hate? Why didn't anyone try and teach him love. And so when he came, they found him guilty. That's when that village came out and said this would be a better world if you wasn't in it. So when Henry came to death row, they put him next to me, and I had no idea what he had done. He had no idea what I was there for. We got to talking. I told him my name. He told me his name, and we began to just talk. And about 3 weeks into just talking every day, you can't see the person next to you or none of that. So someone told me, said, do you know who you talk to every day? And I said, yes, Henry. And they said, no, that's Henry, the Ku Klux Klansman. That's the man that hung that kid. And so I was coming from the shower one day, and I hollered over there at Henry. I said, Henry, why you didn't tell me who you were? And Henry didn't respond. And once I seen Henry wasn't going to respond, I had to ask myself a question. And that question that I asked myself was, did it matter? And the answer was, no, it didn't matter. If you remember when I was telling my story, I said my mother told me no matter what one does in life, they still deserve some compassion. And that compassion made me reach out to this young kid who had been, in my honest opinion, traumatized, brainwashed all of his life to hate who he never know. So one day when I found out who Henry was, I asked Henry a question. I said, Henry, why do you hate me? And Henry said, well, black people. I said, Henry, I didn't ask you anything about black people. I asked you, why do you hate me? And Henry said, I don't even know you. And I said, that is my point exactly. How can you hate me when you don't even know me? And so every day for going up to 14 years, Henry and I talked, and I'm trying to tell this within the time frame. And so Henry's mother and father came to visit him. His mother died right there on the visiting yard of a mass heart attack. 3 months later, his father came to see him, and he died of a mass heart attack. And then they set Henry an execution date. And Henry wrote the warden and asked the warden, could I be with him on the day of his execution because he had no more family. The warden granted his wish and just said that I had to leave at 9 o'clock that night. And so I was with Henry all day that day, and I wanted Henry to enjoy laughter. I wanted Henry not to think about what was going to take place. I just wanted to make Henry laugh. And I've always believed that laughter is good for the soul. And so that night about 9 o'clock, when it got time for them to start preparing Henry for his execution, I stood up and I said, Henry, for the last 14, 15 years, it has been my pleasure to get to know you. Henry, I truly believe that you are a changed person. I want you to know that I consider you my friend, and I want you to know that I love you. And Henry and I embraced, and Henry told me that he loved me. He told me that he considered me his friend. And he said, Ray, I wish I could have really got to know you before we got here. And he was saying on death row. About 12 o'clock that night, they got ready to execute Henry, and they put a microphone to his mouth and they asked him, did he have any final words? And Henry's last word was, all of my life, I was taught to hate. The very people that I was taught to hate are the very people that showed me nothing but love for the last 15 years. And as I leave this world tonight, I leave this world now knowing what love feels like. And they executed my friend Henry. And I truly believe that Henry was not responsible for his action in the way that he was brought up to hate people. And I truly don't believe that his father could have loved him. I don't just believe a father can teach you to hate people and then ask you to go out there and commit a crime of that magnitude and tell you they love him. And I just believe Henry needed somebody to love him. I believe Henry needed to know what love felt like. And I truly believe that the God that I serve wanted me to show Henry what real love felt like. all of us have to give an account for whatever we do in this earth. I have to give an account. You would have to give an account. But I truly believe in the teaching of my mother. My mother told me as a young boy that there would be people that dislike me simply because of the color of my skin. She said, those are the people that I want you to love more, and those are the ones that I want you to pray for. And I found it a pleasure to get to know Henry, to get to show Henry that I was nothing like what his father had led him to believe. And I truly believe Henry needed to understand that the world was not like what the picture that his father, his mother, and his community had drawn him to believe. And so I found it a pleasure. That is one of my greatest joy of being on death row, that I got to meet Henry and I got to change Henry's concept of what Black people look like, act like. And so I was able to help change a man that I truly believe needed it. But I want to give you and your classmates something to think about. Perhaps you would talk about it tomorrow. It took Henry to come to death row in order for Henry to be free. How sad is it that a man would have to come to death row in order for him to be free? Because as long as he was with his father, long as he was in his community, long as he was around his mother, he could never be free. How sad is it that he had to come to death row and be free? And I think coming to death row in a way saved Henry's life. I think about it all the time, that it must have been a gruesome life for him to be told what to do, when to do it, how to do it every day, and to be taught one thing, and that is to hate. Not once did Henry ever say, my father cared me hunting, he cared me fishing, my father cared me nothing but to Klans meeting. How he must have felt to finally be able to make a decision on his own, to be able to make a decision to choose to dislike me now for himself or to dislike me because of what he'd been taught. And so I want you to think about that. And again, thank you for the question.
Thank you so much again, Mr. Hinton. I know that the last hour has gone by quite quickly. I felt like it's zoomed by. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. I think I speak for all the students in front of you that this has been a wonderful opportunity for them and a privilege to speak to you and ask you these questions. And I hope that, you know, with your message, we'll go forward as a school and continue to work on these issues.
Thank you so much for having me again.
Thank you, sir. So I don't officially know how to end this. I don't know if I have to just click us out of here, or maybe Tyler can come on and get us zoomed out. But I think that students, you guys are all set. You can leave the meeting. Hopefully we'll touch base in the next couple of days. Hopefully you continue these conversations with your parents and your classmates. Thank you guys so much. And it was a privilege having you guys as well.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Mr. Hinton. You're incredible.
Thank you, Mr. Hinton.
Truly an
Thank you.
impactful story. Thanks so much.
Thank all of you.